Hello, this podcast is for CNT120. This is focused on our network design lab. We actually will be assembling this lab roughly the last week or so of the semester. But after the midterm, I make this lab available because as we cover different chapters towards the end of the semester, we're going to be picking out equipment from that chapter for the design lab. So this podcast is introduce what we're going to do and kind of what it looks like when it's pulled together, that we have an idea of where we're going, kind of what we're doing and where we're going. So let's take a look through. As you open the design lab, this will be on your content page on D2L, down towards the bottom, one of the last sections. All the information's in there. As I open the actual design lab itself and scroll down through the PDF, the first page gives us a little bit about design. Concepts or design ideas for how you design networks, and these start looking familiar, especially as we look at some ideas a little bit later here in the lab. The second page gives us kind of our outcomes and where we're going with this, and it also gives us the beginning of our scenario. We're pretending to design a network for like a tax consulting company, kind of a small to mid-sized company, if you will. The next couple things on the design lab are these little charts. Now, don't let this throw you. This is just kind of some information that's been gathered after meeting with the customer and taking notes. This is kind of their needs for different parts of their building. So as we look at different offices in the building, these are the things that they need. The common question I get asked here is, the executive office needs this. Does office one need this office? Yes. This is the information, or this is the specs, or the equipment that's needed for each of these areas. The executive office needs all this, office 1 needs all this, office 2 needs all this, and lobby needs all this. And what it really boils down to is making sure we have enough switch ports and connections for this gear. So don't let this overwhelm you. That's just kind of some numbers on what each area needs. And as I keep scrolling, I will see IT admin needs this, support needs this. Oops, I scrolled a little too fast. Support needs this, and so forth. I keep going. These talks about some different things in our building that we would need to know. These are some other notes that we need to know. And the next page or two here talks you through part 1 of the design. This is what we're going to do. We'll do the logical map or the network map. Part 2 is we'll actually start our equipment cost sheet, our equipment list. And part 3 is kind of answering some questions about your design, the pros and cons kind of thing. And then part 4 down here is actually pulling it all together and submitting. We'll come back and revisit these in just a minute. If I keep scrolling through the lab, the next page has a copy of the rubric on the grade sheet. I copied this from D2L, so just so you have a copy of what you're doing. This describes what actually needs to be pulled together for submission. It's 3 parts: a spreadsheet with your equipment on, the map that shows your routers and switches and computers in the network, and then last but not least, a couple questions answered about your design, pros and cons kind of thing. If I keep scrolling, here is a map of the building we're going to network. This should look familiar. The test out this semester, the map changed colors a little bit, but it's still the same basic layout. So I'm using this picture as a little more colorful to look at. These are the different areas that we need to network. So as we start looking at support office, if I look at the chart above, it tells me how many connections I need here, how many computers, all that jazz. Office 1, office 2, lobby, IT admin, executive office. All these get represented in those charts up above on what each area needs for computer drops and connections for phones and that sort of thing. If I keep going, this is also kind of the network map off of test out as well. I put this in here because we can kind of duplicate this for our design. We can use this rough design here and build our network map off that. That'll look familiar in just a minute. And then down here at the very bottom, this is the important part. Right after the midterm, this lab becomes available, and I have in here kind of directions. These are loose directions on how to pick out a switch for your plan and get a price for it. How to pick out a router for your plan. Oops, I scrolled a little too fast. How to pick out a router for your plan and get a price. How to pick out a firewall. How to pick out a wireless access point. So these are the pieces that after the midterm I'm going to be telling you each week when we do the wireless chapter. Go pick out your access point for your design lab. That makes it a little easier. And then your IP phone and so forth. So this becomes available after the midterm mainly because there's some directions here so you can start picking out your gear. All right, so there's a super quick overview of the lab itself. Let's take a look at what it looks like all together, just so you know kind of what it looks like when it's all pulled together. So I'm going to pull up a sample from last semester. Um, the first thing you're going to start with is your network map, and here is a sample network map that a student made last semester. And what you'll see is this is what they submitted using a program like Dia to draw a network map, and I have a separate podcast on how to use that. If I jump back to my lab and I scroll down here, what you'll see is they kind of duplicated this for their design. That's fine. That's a-okay. But what's more important is they picked out their own gear and represented on here. There's their firewall, there's their switch, here's their wireless access points, here's the IP phones, and they have this personalized for them. It's kind of a duplicate of what's already there. That's okay, but it's personalized for them. So that's the first thing you'll do. Once you do that network map, then you have all the gear. All we need to do is put it onto a spreadsheet to tally it up. So here's their spreadsheet of their gear, their firewall, their switch, their router, their phone, those sorts of things, with the model numbers, the quantities, prices, and all tallied up. That's the second thing you'll do in this design lab. So once you have your plan figured out, what's going to get hooked up, and again, this will be done on something like Dia and saved, you'll then plug all that equipment into a spreadsheet here and tally it up. And the very last thing you'll need for your design lab, I'm going to scroll down this student submission here, is there is 3 basic questions for your design. What's the good stuff? What's the advantages of your design? What's the disadvantage of your design? What's the negatives or the pieces that are missing, if you will? And then any sort of suggestions or improvements. That's the third question. And on these, usually you can say advantages, relatively inexpensive. You have extra room for extra ports for hooking up users and that sort of thing. There's security with VLANs and, all the connectivity you need, etc., etc. Disadvantages would be things like single points of failure as you start looking at your design. Oops, let me jump back here. I'm sorry. As you start looking at the design, single point of failure here, those kinds of things. Maybe you don't have that many free ports. Maybe you don't actually have that many free ports in your design when you're done, so those would be some disadvantages. And then suggestions for improvement would be some of those things we just said, the extra ISP connection, extra firewall, to get rid of some of those single points of failure, that sort of stuff. So there is what it looks like when it's pulled together, and what you're noticing is there's roughly 3 things that you're doing, but we're just kind of pulling it together into 2 files. You have your spreadsheet with all your equipment that you'll submit. You have the network map that you'll submit, and then you'll have a couple questions answered on something like a Word document here that you'll submit. So on this part of your design lab where I talk about submission, I actually give you guidance on how to save these files and submit them, how to save your network map for submission, how to save your spreadsheet for submission, and then how to save your answers and so forth for submission. So there's a quick overview of the design lab. If I go back to the beginning now and kind of scroll through, here's some background on network design. Here's the scenario of the company. And then more specifically, each of the areas of the building, what their needs are, 2 connections, those sorts of things. That way I can start tallying that up to figure out how many switches and what types of switches I need. And that's for each area of the building. And then I give you guidance on the first thing you should be doing is your network map on something like Dia or Visio or Draw.io. That's a website that I have linked out there for you as well. Use one of those, make your network map, and again, we can kind of duplicate what TestOut already has. It's okay. We're make it our own with our own equipment and our own model numbers, but we can kind of duplicate what they have because it works. Save that as a JPEG or PNG kind of thing. When you're done, move on to putting all of that equipment into a spreadsheet. So start an Excel spreadsheet and put those pieces of equipment in, get the model numbers, get the quantities and prices. The very end of this lab has help on how to find each piece and how to find the price of each piece. And then the third part is answering the questions, pros and cons of your plan and improvements, suggestions for improvements. You notice I'm looking for at least a paragraph on each one. That way I know you've actually given it some thought and are sharing your ideas. save that as a, Microsoft Word doc or ODT or even a PDF. Any one of those are fine. And then last but not least, pulling all this together for submission to the Dropbox on D2L. So there's an overview of the design lab. There's also what it looks like when it's pulled together and kind of reminding you of how to proceed through this, that we have an idea to do it. And then here is your grading, how it's actually going to get graded. And this will get submitted to the Dropbox on D2L. I'll use the rubric on D2L to grade this, and you'll be able to get feedback from this as soon as I look across it at the end of the semester. So there's an overview of your design lab and what it looks like, as well as how to get the thing started and how to get it pulled together for submission.